Bonjour mes amis et bienvenue en prochaine leçon de français. Aujourd'hui, on va regarder les pronoms de complément de objets, soit les objets directs ou soit les objets indirects. So today we're going to be looking at direct and indirect object pronouns and how we can tell the difference between the two of them. It only is going to affect when deciding between only two different forms, but we do need to take a look at it to understand where it comes from. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. En premier, on va regarder les différences entre les deux pronoms. Premier, direct object pronouns. These are the straightforward ones. These are the ones that receive the action of the verb directly, as your English language arts teacher may have told you. I like to simplify that. The direct object pronoun, or the direct object in general, is the object in the sentence that gets verbed. I watch it. What got watched? It. There's my direct object, or in this case, a direct object pronoun. I'm washing the dishes. What's gotten washed? The dishes. There's my direct object. So if I change it to a direct object pronoun, I washed them, and them would be a direct object pronoun. I invited her. What got invited? Her. There's my direct object pronoun. So direct object pronoun, if you can ask yourself what got verbed, using your verb, of course, that can help you identify the direct object and or the direct object pronoun that is needed. Conversely, indirect object pronouns, they receive the action indirectly from the verb, as your language arts teacher may have told you. I like to say that it gets something from the verb. So we're not getting verbed here, but we're getting something from the verb. So something else is getting verbed, and we're getting whatever that something else is. That's how you know it's an indirect object. And also, your teachers may have told you at some point, if you can use the word to or for in a sentence with the pronoun or the object, and it still makes sense, that's your indirect object. Also, especially in French, indirect object pronouns are going to be used with communication verbs. So anything that has to do with talking, listening, speaking, telling, writing, reading, and if it has to do with giving or receiving, so giving, taking, borrowing, selling, buying, these are all going to be indirect object pronoun verbs, not exclusively, footnote to come later. So for instance, let's see, I'm writing her a letter. I'm writing her a letter. So I can ask myself, well, okay, what's getting verbed? What's getting written? Well, that's the letter. Okay, there's my direct object. Who's getting the letter? Her. So I now know that her is my indirect object because it's getting something from the verb. Or I put in the word to. I'm writing a letter to her. Hey, it still makes sense. So that tells me her is an indirect object. Communication, writing. Well, that has to do with communication, so I know that probably needs an indirect object pronoun. Likewise, I'm buying him a car. Okay, well, what's being verbed? Car. There's your direct object. Who is getting the car? Oh, him. Well, there's my indirect object. I could also use the word for, put it in a sense that it makes sense. I'm buying a car for him. Oh, there's another clue that is my indirect. And buying, that's a verb of giving and receiving, so that's probably going to need an indirect object pronoun. But again, footnote, not exclusively. So that is how you can kind of decide which one are you using, a direct or an indirect. The good news is that knowing the difference between this is the most important when you're not talking about me or you or us. So if you are saying me or to me, you or to you, we or to us, it's going to be moi, toi, nous, and vous. So if it's one of those, you don't even have to go through this process. As long as it's a me, you, or us, then you're fine. It's going to be moi, toi, nous, and vous, as long as it's specific people. When it's a him, her, or it, or them, that's when we have to know the difference, because when it's a him, an it, a her, or a them, we've got different forms. Obviously, we got le, la, les, which we've been working with for him, her, and it. Notice that le and la are the only ones that abbreviate to L apostrophe. That's an important note to later. But if it's to him, to her, to it, or for him, for her, for it, or to them, for them, you notice you've got different pronouns, lui and leur. It's one syllable, lui. So it's like the word oui, like for yes, but put an L in front of it. Lui. So these are the ones that we have to memorize and know the difference between the two. All the others we know we just get to use the same. So let's take a look. So here's the list of common communication verbs that you notice are all using those indirect object pronouns. The say, eat. Je lui parle. Je lui téléphone. Je lui réponds. Je leur demande. Demander, to ask. Je leur dis, dire, to say. Je leur pose une question. Je ne lui explique pas. Notice I don't abbreviate lui. It's just L-U-I all the time. Je ne lui explique pas. I'm not explaining to him. And je vais lui écrire, write to him or to her, so I got to use lui. Now on the right, you'll notice that I wrote them in a different way in italics. That's just to go to show that I can put them in front of the verb with lui et leur, or it goes after the verb, but I've got to use an a. So if your verb is parler à, téléphoner à, répondre à, or anything that has an à after it, typically, that gives you a clue that you're going to need an indirect object pronoun. For instance, téléphoner. In English, we say I call him using a direct object, but in French, it's always going to be I call to him, téléphoner à. So you know that always there's going to be an indirect object pronoun with téléphoner. Je téléphone à lui. Also, it gives you a clue. If it's an a followed by a person, that's an indirect object pronoun or an indirect object. Giving and receiving verbs, and I use a flower as an example. Je lui donne une fleur. I'm giving her a flower. Je lui envoie une fleur. I'm sending him a flower. Because guys like flowers too. Je lui montre une fleur. I'm showing her a flower. Je lui prête une fleur. I'm lending them a flower. Lending, giving or receiving. Je leur apporte une fleur. I'm bringing them a flower. Je leur offre une fleur. We know that verb, offrir, to offer. So I'm offering them a flower. Je ne lui vends pas de fleurs. I'm not selling them any flowers. And je vais lui acheter une fleur. I'm buying her a flower. So what's being given or what's being received in every single one of these sentences? A flower. There's my direct object. Who's getting the flower? Well, that's my indirect object. You'll notice that in my first ones, I've got my indirect object pronoun in front of the verb as always. In my other sentences in italics, I'm using that à lui. That's a clue to let you know if it's a person, well, that's my indirect object. So sometimes we can use both because in this sentence, like in the very first one, je donne à lui une fleur. What's being given? Une fleur. That's a direct object. Who's getting the flower? À lui, him or her. So it's got an indirect and a direct object in this sentence. So knowing the difference and how they will work together is important to understand. So understanding those is going to be important to us. So quel pronom, nouvel élève. So for this one, we're just going to practice. You notice I've got the options. It's either going to be le or L apostrophe or lui. So for each one of these, we need to decide, is it going to use le or lui, direct or indirect? And all of them have referred to a him, which is un nouvel élève. You got a new French exchange student at the school, so these are what you're going to do for him or what you're going to do in general. Je blank parle français. Speak French. Okay. Do we need le or lui? If it's speaking, are we speaking him or speaking to him? Is it a verb of communication or giving or receiving? Surely you said communication, so you know the correct answer should be je lui parle français. Next one. Je invite chez moi. Invite, invité. So I'm inviting him to my house. What's being invited? Or does it have to do with communication or giving and receiving? But what's being invited? Him. So je l'invite chez moi. Okay, now pause the video and I want you to take a look at the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 that are left. Il y en a 8 qui restent. And I want you to just take a moment and I want you to decide which one should be le or L apostrophe and which one should be lui. Pause the video at this point and take a moment to think about it. Okay, I hope you took a moment to pause and you took a look at these sentences. Présente à mes amis. I hope you notice that it says à mes amis, to my friends. That's two people. So it already has an indirect object. We can only use one. So it's got to be I'm introducing him to my friends. Je le présente à mes amis. Téléphone. We already said that one always uses indirect. So it should be je lui téléphone. I help him. Well, which one makes sense? I help him or I help to him or for him? Well, it's je l'aide. I help him using a direct object. The next one's a trick. Attendre, to wait for, au parc. However, attendre already has the for, F-O-R, built into the verb in its meaning, so we only need a direct object, so je l'attends au parc. Je montre la ville, show the town. What's being shown? Oh, the town. Who's getting that showing? That means indirect, so je lui montre la ville. I'm buying him a gift. Oh, buying, that's giving and receiving, and we know what's being bought en cadeau, so je lui achète un cadeau. I'm lending him a pen. What's being lent, him or pen? Well, pen is what's being lent. Who's getting it? Je lui prête un stylo. I'm sending him a postcard, une carte postale. I'm sending him a postcard. Let's see. Well, what's being sent? The postcard. Okay, so I need an indirect. Also, envoyer. That has to do with giving and receiving. Je lui envoie une carte postale. So, I hope that kind of makes sense. Take a look at these notes. Make sure you've written down some good ones. Write down these examples so you can kind of see, determine why they are the way they are, and you're going to use that in your exercises today. Au revoir, mes amis.